Good evening, all of you here in the Blauwe Zaal in Eindhoven, and also the viewers from home. We welcome you here from Eindhoven University of Technology for our special event tonight with writer and thinker Arnon Grunberg. We're very happy that you can all join us. Very happy also to have some people here live again. It's wonderful to welcome you here. It's a special night. We are celebrating part of our birthday because Eindhoven University of Technology is 65 years old this year. And for this year, we have a very special guest, as I said, Arnon Grunberg, who will speak to us today. Tonight is the first of 3 events that we are organizing with him. He's our artist in residence, and the theme is the ethical casino. And we will talk, he will lead a group of our students on a journey to investigate the ideal of equality and meritocracy. And tonight is the first night of 3 events where he will introduce the concept of meritocracy and also what may be the problems with that ideal. Please, a warm welcome for Arnon Grunberg.
Good evening. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for being here. Thank you for inviting me and letting me speak about something I usually don't speak about. I'm going to talk for about 35 minutes, I guess. The text is titled The Lucky Sperm Club, The Lucky Sperm and Egg Club. And there will be no movie clips, no music, no PowerPoint. It's just going to be words, so fasten your seatbelts. Also, I'd like to say that I'm aware of the fact that the local soccer club is playing tonight its first match in the Europa League of the season. And I'm highly honored that you all chose this lecture over soccer. And I understand if you check your phone now and then to see what's going on a few kilometers away. So as long as you don't snore, I'm fine. Also, so you know, afterwards there will be a possibility to ask questions, so there will be Q&A. Out of sheer curiosity, before I start, who of you is not able to understand Dutch? Okay, it's quite a few. Good to know. Okay, there we go. The Lucky Sperm and Egg Club. In a review in The New Yorker in 2019 of 2 books on the wrongs and rights of meritocracy, especially the wrongs, needless to say, Louis Menand defines the word handily. The term meritocracy was invented in the 1950s with a satirical intent that has now mostly been lost. Merit was originally defined as IQ plus effort, but it has evolved to stand for a somewhat ineffable combination of cognitive abilities, extracurricular talents, and socially valuable personal qualities like leadership and civic-mindedness. End of quote. The word meritocracy appears to have been with us forever, but it came into existence rather late, and the satirical intent of the word has largely disappeared. In recent years, hundreds, if not thousands, of articles and books have been written about the failures of meritocracy, its perverse side effects, and the dangers of continued belief in meritocracy as a means to a better society. I can testify that I was unable to detect any attempt at humor or satire in the articles and books that I've read about this subject. It seems that Nietzschean laughter, the ability to be redeemed by a certain laughter, is not highly appreciated, perhaps out of fear to be misunderstood. It's unclear if it was ever really appreciated, except for by an initiated few. When we talk about meritocracy, sooner or later, and more often sooner, we talk about money. Money is serious business, and when we talk about money, we're not supposed to laugh. One author, Daniel Markovich, a professor of law at Yale University, in his book The Meritocracy Trap, published in 2019, suggests that most ills in American society stem from the fact that the country lives under the yoke of meritocracy and its structural failings. It's not so much that meritocracy is a system that derailed, but that we built and have believed in a system that could only derail. This assertion reminded me of a discussion about communism a couple of decades ago. Should we solely blame Stalin for the mass killings in the Soviet Union? Or was it the communist ideology itself that sooner or later would inevitably produce concentration camps and a police state? Sometime between the 1950s and today, something changed. Our expectations of achieving a just society and our vision of this society have been heavily influenced by the civil rights revolution. Every revolution, including the civil rights revolution, produces a counter-revolution, and many aspects of the culture wars that today are being fought in the US, and to a lesser degree also in Europe, cannot be understood without a solid understanding of the civil rights revolution of the 50s and 60s. Despite some serious and some less serious attempts at counter-revolution, many beliefs and ideas that were avant-garde 60 or 70 years ago have become mainstream. To name just one example, the acceptance of gay marriage. But avant-garde opinions that became mainstream have fanned the flames of the culture wars. In every country in the world, there are people who are extremely unhappy with changes that they feel are being forced upon them. This is especially true for the US, where religion has a more prominent status than in Europe. Religion often, though not always, plays a certain role in this unhappiness. Although contempt for many aspects of modernity can be found in various groups and subcultures. Modernity is an extremely vague term, which descended upon us in the late 18th century. And the term modernity is here to stay. Despite the quick rise and slow fall of postmodernism in the last decades of the 20th century, we are still surrounded by modernity. I would say that the making of the middle class and middle class culture in the 19th century has a central place in this thing called modernity. How can we talk about meritocracy without talking about the middle class and middle class culture? Counterculture, one of the strategies of middle class culture to deal with its own discontents, is not something that's by definition progressive, or a strategy that belongs to groups and individuals who could be labeled leftists. There exists nowadays a nostalgic counterculture that's not only unhappy with the legalization of abortion, but also with the main tenet of meritocracy. The belief that everybody should be able to join the competition. Quite a few people will dislike the use of the word competition in this context, if only because outcomes in any competition can be undesirable. But if we go back to what meritocracy is, a society where merit, roughly again, IQ plus effort, is rewarded, where merit should play a decisive role, we must conclude that meritocracy has never been an attempt to restrain competition. There exists a gray zone between social Darwinism and the belief that unconditional solidarity can be forced upon mankind. And most people, most of the time, operate in this gray zone. The idea that a competition should be open to all, according to meritocratic rule, even today makes some people feel extremely uncomfortable. The debate about migration, which is at the center of most European debates since 2001, is in essence a debate about meritocracy, about the question who can join the competition and who cannot. Condescending remarks about migrants, that they will be dependent on social security forever, or worse, will turn out to be an enemy of the society they very much wanted to join, are, in my opinion, merely a different way of saying we don't want our children to compete with your children in school. We don't want to compete with you for housing, work, or social security. Stay where you are, engage in your local competition, and leave us alone. If you examine certain stereotypes about Italian immigrants in late 19th century America, you will see that they are remarkably similar to European stereotypes of contemporary migrants from Africa and the Middle East. There are always other newcomers to fear, but fear itself is always present. Behind all these prejudices, there's the old suspicion that one's own IQ and efforts might not be good enough to secure a good standard of life. In other words, we are talking about middle-class fear. And I don't use the word middle class condescendingly. We are all lower or higher middle class. Especially in Western Europe, the working class has mostly disappeared. And the fact that aristocracy started to fade away more than 200 years ago made the rise of the bourgeoisie and therefore meritocracy possible. Once upon a time, meritocracy looked like a giant step forward to a better society. It appeared to put an end to determinism. The location of your cradle was not necessarily a strong predictor of your future life. The ugly truth is that if effort and intelligence are rewarded in whatever way that intelligence is measured, there will still be winners and losers. Or if you detest the word loser, winners and not so much winners. Winners and not winners. Winners and those who gave up or were given up by others. Not too long ago, then presidential candidate Hillary Clinton spoke of deplorables. We know who she had in mind. Let's return to the civil rights revolution that took place about 60 years ago. On the one hand, we see a somewhat religious deepening nostalgia, an unwillingness to accept that culture and society are constantly changing and that you cannot live in a past that's partly imaginary. On the other hand, it's unavoidable that when avant-garde opinions become mainstream, a new avant-garde will develop with stronger demands and different, perhaps more severe criticism of society. A revolution will never end because its goals have been accomplished. Instead, it will fade out, or the counter-revolution will undo its spirit. And there's the old saying that every revolution eats its own children, which is often the case. In the summer of 2021, Nicholas Lehman wrote an article in the New Yorker with a telling headline, "Can affirmative action survive?" In this article, he discussed the famous, unanimous declaration of the Supreme Court of the United States. Excuse me. In 1954, that legally segregated schools are unconstitutional. Culture and society are changing constantly. But as Faulkner said, the past is extremely stubborn. We could go back to the French Revolution, or probably even further in time, to explore the different meanings of the notion of equality. The United States Constitution which was written around the same time that King Louis XVI and his wife, Queen Marie Antoinette, were beheaded in France, states that certain truths are self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It took 200 years and many festering wounds to make it self-evident as well that quite a few things separate the theory of equality from bringing that theory into practice. The state had a role to play in removing obstacles so that all citizens could pursue their happiness without being held back by different sorts of helplessness, not in the last place, discrimination, and what's now called institutional racism. From the very beginning of the civil rights revolution, education was at the center of the fight, especially elite education. In other words, universities. Who was allowed to go to which university? This was, and still is, an existential question. Education became the road to a better quality of life, first and foremost, in an economic sense. After all, as New York Times columnist Ross Douthat put it, at the universities, a ruling class is being shaped. And because universities, some universities more than others, tend to produce the ruling class, diversity becomes an important issue. If the ruling class consists of just one segment of society, how can we accept this class to take into consideration the interest of the entire population? We have reached the conclusion that in order to rule effectively, the ruling class must be viewed by large parts of the population as representative of the overall population. The same is true for certain institutions. For example, it can be dangerous to exclude important groups in the population from the army. One of the things that has contributed to making Afghanistan a failed state in the last 2 decades is that an important ethnic group, the Pashtun, has been immensely underrepresented in the Afghan National Army. In the Netherlands, we can hear echoes of this debate. Both the far left and the far right have complained that Parliament poorly reflects the overall population because MPs with a university degree are overrepresented. If you accept that universities produce the ruling class, and if you don't accept this, what's the alternative? This argument is slightly absurd. You could complain, and many do, that the ruling class consists mainly of white men. You could desire to dismantle the patriarchy, and many do. But to complain that your ruling class is overeducated is a bit like complaining that your dentist is not self-taught, but went to school solely in order to gain your trust so that you would be willing to open your mouth in the dentist's chair and let him do whatever he thinks is needed. Society cannot function without trust as the default mode. When distrust becomes the default mode, something starts to eat away at the pillars of society. One of the more destructive side effects of 9/11 was exactly the rise of distrust in Western societies. Of course, you need a license to set up a dentist practice. Without such a license, you would break the law. In one of my early novels, the main character starts working as a dentist without ever having gone to dental school. I was inspired, as is often the case, by certain real-life events. Some 20 years ago, in southern Manhattan, a plumber, if I recall correctly, moonlighted as a dentist. After he had practiced his side job for a few years, a patient was injured by his dental actions and decided to sue him. The dentist ended up in prison. The scary part of the story is that it took so long for the fake dentist to get caught. No license is needed to enter the world of politics. And that's a good thing. The public space and the world of politics is a public space, should be open to everybody. An important characteristic of a true democracy is not only that all or most of the adult citizens can vote, but also that all or most of the adult citizens can run for office. Politics may be a profession. It probably is a business as well. But it should be a profession that's open to anyone. The fact that many American presidents went to elite universities and most MPs in the Netherlands have a university or college degree shows that there is a fundamental difference between the ruling class and mushrooms, which anyone can pick at will in the woods in the fall. The ruling class is produced in certain places and certain institutions, which is not to say that by attending to university or even by attending an elite university, you automatically become a member of the ruling class. However, university education drastically increases your chances to join the ruling class. If we want to have a diverse ruling class, we should have more diversity at universities. That's the underlying idea. But, as Doughted rightly pointed out, elite institutions, by their very nature, are not a mass opportunity system. If you want to expand opportunity for the masses, it's doubtful whether we can achieve this goal by trying to get more and more people to get a university education. It's not very healthy that in some families and in some circles, not going to university is seen as a failure. And I'm not sure if the proper way to motivate elementary school children is to tell them that the less education they achieve, the less money they will make in their adult life. Once again, it's important to keep in mind that the basic argument to go to university is a purely economical one. Knowledge is talked about and produced in school as an investment. Learn this now, and in 10 years from now, your annual income will be 2,000 euros higher. If you want to live a decent, middle-class life, if you want your children to play in their own garden, go to university. But as I mentioned before, even in societies where the demand for unskilled work or work that doesn't require higher education is low, we cannot expect that most or all children will get a university or college education. And I'm skeptical that most unskilled work will be done by robots. Imagine them doing the jobs of nurses, waiters, or manicurists. For the foreseeable future, the service industry is going to rely on human resources and not on robotic resources. Yes, researchers have found that a predictor of where children will end up in our educational system, how high they will climb in the tree, is to look at the degrees, or lack thereof, of their parents. In other words, social mobility is not what we want it to be, and this creates a class of people that appears to be more aristocratic than we would like it to be. This problem probably can be fixed, at least partly, for example, by delaying the selection of a child's level of education. It's not a true problem of meritocracy. Diversity and equal opportunity are not necessarily the same thing. If in a certain society the majority of dentists are Asian or Jewish, whereas only a small part of the population is Asian or Jewish, this should not be regarded as a problem. I don't believe that we should strive to achieve certain quotas for particular population groups at universities, within professions, or at companies. We cannot and should not expect every subculture, every segment of society to be a true mirror of that society. More generally, we should not put too much faith in how we divide mankind. Our subdivisions are by nature arbitrary. The fact that racism exists does not imply that the standards of racists should be taken more seriously than is absolutely necessary. And although we may all be middle-class citizens in one way or another, that doesn't mean that we live in a classless society. Even if we manage to create a perfect balance of diversity in our societies, we won't have a classless society. In the Netherlands, the myth of a classless society is so much part of the national DNA that people don't like to talk about class. The avoidance of the topic of class also finds its origin in the pillarized society that the Netherlands used to be before the power of the churches and old ideologies started to fade away. Religion and certain political beliefs created well-defined categories in Dutch society. Everyone belonged to one of the many pillars. This provided people with a group identity and gave the Dutch permission to believe that class was something from the past. But the past is haunting us, and the less time we spend studying it, the more we will probably be haunted by it. In Western democracies, the rise of nostalgic counterculture, often labeled populism, can be traced to a sentiment that goes back to the 19th century and to the beginning of the nation-states in Europe. Large parts of the European population believed that the state was not acting in their best interests. They didn't feel represented by the state, and the two supranational totalitarian movements of the 20th century that grew out of developments in the 19th century, the creation of a working class, the rise of the bourgeoisie, the end of nobility, were a response to these sentiments. The wish to replace the old elite with a new one is nothing new, but you still end up with an elite. And of course, this doesn't mean that there are never good reasons for replacing old elites. In the last 2 decades, we have witnessed here in the Netherlands, in the US, and in many other countries, the production and the politicization of the sentiment that the old elite is corrupt, incapable of making wise decisions, and that despite all their peers' sentiments, they're only interested in themselves. More or less the same things were once said about the old aristocracy, and if you go back in time a little further, about the upper echelons of the Catholic Church. Protestantism could come into existence because the Church was seen as corrupt and vulgar, a place for sinners, not for saints. The attack against the old elite are often organized by men or women who themselves are part of the elite. Whether it's Mr. Baudet here in the Netherlands or Mr. Trump in the US. Nothing is more dangerous than a spiteful intellectual. And although it's not easy to think of Mr. Trump as an intellectual, it's clear that people can feel resentment if the class they want to enter or belong to doesn't take them completely seriously, despite their wealth and power. In other words, if a certain class has other values besides money and real estate, it's difficult to buy your way into that class. It's for good reasons that sociologists speak of intellectual capital, cultural capital, etc. Whether you like the political parties and their leaders who want to drain the swamp, or whatever words they use to signal that they are willing to end the status quo with unconventional means, is less important here. What's important is that we can agree that the production of the ruling class is not going well. And the willingness to challenge the ruling class has increased after 2001, following the shock of 2 world wars where the resulting desire was to avoid experiments that might end with bloodshed. This has changed. The civil rights revolution was less about using all possible means to end the status quo and to get rid of the elite, as it was about implementing certain changes within existing power structures. In places where the revolution turned out extremely violent, as with the Red Army faction in Germany, it quickly lost most of its popular support. One of the leaders who's currently leaving the political stage and who's applauded for being an exceptional leader is Angela Merkel, who herself could be considered to be an outsider. How exceptional her career has been was emphasized recently in an article in a German weekly Die Zeit, in which Merkel, without any sense of irony, was celebrated as a good person. Most often we want our leaders to be ruthless. We want them to be father figures who are there to protect us, to comfort us, especially in times of crisis. Whether the exception that is Angela Merkel implies that all problems would be solved if only we cast more votes for women is questionable. I would like to remind everyone that there will be a presidential election in France in 2022 and that Marine Le Pen is on the ballot. But Merkel is a good example that the ruling class is not impenetrable. And of course, the ruling class does not only consist of the people we can vote for and who are highly visible in society. There's a case to be made that true power is invisible and discreet. But democracy is a highly symbolic process. And it's unavoidable that we find ourselves focused on the visible part of the ruling class, the visible part of the political process. Democracy may be in theory an open market of ideas. In reality, it's more like a market of conscious and subconscious desires and longings. Not in the last place, a deeply rooted desire for powerful and protective parent figures. These days, discussions about the ruling class usually consist of pejorative remarks or discussions focused on particular people. Herman Tjenk Willink, an elderly statesman in the Netherlands, recently remarked that vehement discussions about the Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte, who has been in office since 2001, are not helpful because he is the product of a culture, not a person who has shaped the culture. Rather than continuing to dream about a society without any hierarchies, we may be better advised to have a discussion about how we can produce a better ruling class. A side effect of avoiding this discussion is that there's no serious discussion about the legitimization of the ruling class. Once upon a time, the king and queen were more or less the continuation of God with other means, just like the Pope. They were not in need of any legitimization. Nowadays, we need other, less magical means to legitimize our ruling class. Ross Douthat discusses 3 ways in which this legitimization can be achieved. First of all, intergenerational continuity, which we now consider unjust. We strive to minimize the degree to which privileges are inherited. Second, representation, which is the foundation of democracy, the people vote. That political parties and the electorate tend to favor more highly educated politicians should once again not surprise us. And third, aptitude, which brings us back to IQ plus effort. The disappearance of the old aristocracy and the monarchies in 19th century Europe, combined with technological and industrial inventions, changed Europe and the rest of the world and brought a new class into existence. A class that had its own god, work. A class that was willing to worship labor as an idol. A class that wanted to hang on to the dream that if sufficient effort and talent was provided, everything was possible. Needless to say, there's not a single middle class, neither in the 19th century nor today, but all the different middle classes had something in common. The belief in work and its rewards, and in later days also the belief in leisure. Mass education, which truly started more than 100 years ago, was above all simply an economic necessity. The need for skilled laborers was growing. And the invention of all the various middle classes meant that the image of man changed. No longer was man created by God in his own image. Man was supposed to create himself. Man turned out to be something that we now call a human resource. Man was his own field, his own factory, his own apple tree, and he should live long enough to bear enough fruit. No need to waste expensive human resources, especially when birth rates are low, as they currently are across all of Europe. The French Revolution may have been focused on the destruction of the old aristocracy and the age-old idea that all certain people had to do to be an excellent human being was to be born. However, even if meritocracy works well, it will always result in the creation of a new aristocracy. This was pointed out by the British sociologist and Baron of Dartington, Michael Young, who lived from 1915 to 2002, who in his slightly satirical book, The Rise of the Meritocracy, not only coined the word meritocracy, for which unfortunately he was not given due credit in Louis Menand's article, but who also provided quite a few objections against meritocracy that are still valid today. Young wrote, "Being a member of the lucky sperm club confers no moral rights to advantage." The end of quote. In this day and age, we would be well advised to talk about the lucky sperm and egg club, but that's a minor detail. All the current day talk about diversity, which as I have argued, is to a certain degree necessary, is also a strategy to avoid the most painful questions. Replacing one ruling class with another is not always morally just or helpful. What to do with members of the less lucky sperm and egg club, regardless of their ethnicity, religion, sexual preference, and gender? I don't believe that we can or should predict the future of human beings based on their genetic material. The fact that the future is open, is not predetermined, enables us to be free and therefore moral human beings. The fact that life is by and large a casino is not only a tragedy, it also liberates us. And a person's environment plays an important role as well. We are not completely helpless victims of our own genes and those of others. Also, the question of whether you belong to the lucky sperm club is context dependent. You need different qualities and abilities to succeed at the university than to survive as an inmate in a concentration camp. Likewise, flexibility and the willingness to adjust are often, but not always, helpful predispositions. I don't have an easy solution at hand. My aim today was to identify and examine a problem. I would argue that more respect for the less lucky ones and adopting a less patronizing attitude toward our people might help. Less welfare state is not the solution, but more welfare state is not always better. The conviction that the state can correct all misery caused by the casino of life is a painful and dangerous illusion. At best, the state can help to avoid the most cruel instances of misery. But it's important to remember that all states, some more than others, have caused misery and have crushed citizens and non-citizens alike. My father used to say that people who are considered stupid and dumb also have a story to tell, and it's worth listening to that story. This may provide a good starting point. But to get started, we must realize that education itself is not only a solution. It is by definition also part of the problem, because education also creates inequality. It rewards members of the Lucky Sperm Club and Egg Club, and as Michael Young pointed out 60 years ago, there's no moral ground for these rewards. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Arnon, for these inspiring words and for so many questions. I think we're all still thinking, or at least I'm still thinking about many things that you just said. Also, I have a dentist appointment in 3 weeks, and I'm getting very, very nervous. Yeah. I think my colleague over there, Lisa, is writing down the questions we get from internet. So if you want questions at home, you can put them in the chat. And Lisa will send them here to my iPad. But we also have, of course, questions. Maybe the first hand going up. Can I ask my colleague to come with a very impressive device? Yeah, our microphone.
I'm triggered by what you said about dentists. Let's say there are 10,000 dentists in the Netherlands and 10% are Jewish and only 1% is Muslim. This is not a random thing. Especially there are patterns and mechanisms that lead to this. And you can say, okay, we do not want to be exactly the same mirror, but we can also be curious. They have the same support in their youth. They have the same possibilities. So it's not only about sperm and eggs.
No.
There's a culture, there are people, there are expectations, there are biases. So why do you think, because I myself am a physicist, and seeing women in physics really helped me a lot. And there were not...
Seeing what?
I'm a physicist.
Yeah. And seeing what?
And seeing physics women really helped me thinking I'm not weird, and I can belong, and I can be part of the physics community. So representation and role models really can be very strong. So did you think about that part, about quota that help just visibility and the possibility of having a more diverse elite?
Yes, well, I mentioned affirmative action, and of course this could be considered an attempt at placing quotas. But I do think that's always problematic. I'm not by definition against affirmative action, not at all. But it is problematic if you subdivide mankind in certain categories, and what categories are you going to use, and what do you want to come up with? So, and also I don't deny the fact that environment plays a role, and that there are certain groups of people. I mentioned structural racism. I mentioned, of course, there is class, and there are people who are disadvantaged. Absolutely, that's no question. But as I said, even if we achieve a really optimal educational system, there will be still huge differences. And I think also it's dangerous if we start to count people. If said, "What's your identity?" And okay, now we have maybe this group six too many, so we don't accept any more of this group. You may know that Harvard was being sued by Asians because apparently there were too many Asians at Harvard University, an elite university, as you know, in the US, and they felt that they would be discriminated against because other minorities were favored. Harvard won that case, but still, this is a good example how dangerous it can be, or how complicated it can be to say, okay, we focus now on this group, because.
I agree about the complication, but not about the danger.
Well, the complication is a danger, because I would say the moment that you label people and that they should be that first and foremost they're representative of a minority group, and therefore they are chosen to join the university. I'm not sure, or to join whatever group.
Complicated enough. That's not the reason why. So people are very good, and we want to have more women, but only very good women, or only very good.
I think maybe you should need the mic is needed in order for other people to, or not. Is that what you? Yeah. So.
I can repeat. I think, and maybe also draw. A little parallel to this university. We don't need to go all the way to Harvard. I mean, I sort of read or heard in your lecture a little small jab to Eindhoven University of Technology, because we became quite famous last year because we had a quotum for female scientists. And I think the lady here also said, or tried to say, like, here in Eindhoven we had a problem with not attracting enough female scientists, not because because they didn't qualify, but because power reproduces itself. So it's very, very hard if there's not enough examples of female who in physics or whatever, to become part of that group. So we didn't lower the standard for females to become scientists here. It is equally high, but we have changed the system a little bit to give them equal opportunity. So.
Well, to me, the main point of this text was not whether I'm in favor of quotas or not. It was a side. Personally, I think sometimes it can be necessary, but it's like a medicine with lots of side effects, and you should not subscribe it too easily. That's what and if I'm not mistaken, also there was a court case against Eindhoven. No?
Yeah, that's true. But I see a reaction actually from the chair of our executive board, who would very much like to say something about this topic. I think, Robert Jan Smits. Wait, just wait a second.
Later, I would like to add something more to the lady's remark, but that can come later.
Okay. Well, it's along the same topic. So first of all, thank you very much for a brilliant lecture. I really enjoyed it. You wrote an article in June 2019 when we took our affirmative action, that is vacant posts for female scientists only. And I like this very much, because although you say in this article that you're not in favor of affirmative action, you say sometimes the elite who feels extremely happy and confident in their own game need to be completely disrupted by some radical measures in order to get rid of this all-boys network. And that's exactly what we did. We wanted to break that system which was not functioning at our university. And that's why I, again, would like to hear you, whether you're still standing behind what you've written in June 2019, and you immediately will say yes, of course, because that was for me something quite strong, that the elite, those in power, feel very often comfortable in the games they have created, the rules they have created, and sometimes someone needs to shake them up so that they get out of the comfort zone.
No, absolutely. I mean, also as I answered to the questions by the lady, that I'm not. It's a medicine, and sometimes the medicine might be necessary, but it's a medicine with I would say, ugly side effects.
Yeah, and I think
for many reasons, and we could go into details, but maybe that's not.
No, but you're right as well, and that's why the medication.
And also, I'd like to add, and I said this tonight, that replacing one elite with the next one is not necessarily a moral thing to do. It's not necessarily that the new elite is by definition better than the old one. So this is also something we should keep in mind. I mean, I remember during the last elections in the Netherlands, there was on Twitter, there was this phrase going around, vote for a woman. And it's for good reasons that I mentioned the French elections in 1 year, because I'm not sure how many Le Pen supporters here are present, but I would say that voting for a woman in the French elections is, in my opinion, a terrible mistake.
But Merkel is a female scientist.
Now, I mentioned Merkel is for many, I mean, she came from Eastern Germany, she's an outsider, and she, yeah, absolutely. And there was no affirmative action there.
No. But
yeah.
well, you set her as an exemplary woman.
Yeah.
But we would say maybe here in Eindhoven we would look at her as an exemplary scientist, and that may be a more direct link to her being a good person than
Ooh,
her gender.
Yeah, you believe so?
And it may be.
I'm skeptical. I'm highly skeptical. I can, yeah.
Let's go to set this side and this topic aside for a bit and see, because I saw some more hands. Just yes. First this gentleman here, and then the lady over there.
Yes, thank you very much. I do have lots of thoughts about this, but let's keep it to something simple. You mentioned that universities or education sometimes can be an investment, and that it's not, that it can have downsides, that you really need to do this, you really need to do that, and so on, which I think is interesting. That places a big burden on people in general. And similar to the affirmative action things, for example, it is something that when people or society thinks that you should do something and so on, that may cause problems. And my train of thought is going nowhere, but I was curious about your opinion on well, this exactly what I'm just mentioning. Why is it troublesome, apart from the
what exactly is... I got the first part of your question, but I didn't get the second part.
So, society's expectations can place a lot of burden on people because you should do this, you should do that, affirmative action should fix this. Do you think that is a problem because of the burden it places on people, or
okay, yeah.
something in general?
I got it. First, I go back to your first thing you said, that we talk about knowledge and education as an investment. I mean, I can give an anecdotal evidence that my godson, who's now 17, when he was in elementary school, his teacher pointed out that by going to higher education, he was going to make more money later in life. This was the main argument, and I think this, what he was being told there, is not exceptional. You can hear it everywhere, and I think this is, to me, it's problematic if you see knowledge and education solely as something that will give you later in life more money. Of course, I mean, everybody who doesn't want to have a certain comfort, but maybe I'm a bit of a romantic also. I think that other values are extremely important as well, and that we make our lives poorer and emptier if we only look at education and knowledge as a way to obtain a certain income. If knowledge is just a means to an end, to an economical end, I think all of society is going to be uglier. The second part has to do with my fear and being skeptical about the abilities of a society, of a class, to shape the society and to make it as perfect as possible without thinking of human beings as complicated and not always very rational mortals who don't always behave as we expect them to behave. So I think that sometimes we are a bit haughty, and I mentioned Nietzsche also, he warned already for the fact that after the death of God, that men would sit in the chair of God and would not be able to fulfill the duties of a God, because we are just not that powerful. So by thinking we can produce perfect outcomes by putting quota in place, I think we might be disappointed. We might be disappointed by the outcomes, and we should not be too confident that with our measures, with our knowledge, we can get the results we want to get. And that's also why I think why it was so, to me, while doing research about meritocracy, it was so enlightening to see that Michael Young already 60 years ago warned for the effects of the genetic part of it all. That what I said, we cannot change certain bad luck does exist, and we cannot always avoid it or change it or prevent it. What all we can do is by having a welfare state is the results of bad luck to soften the results, to make life a bit less gruesome for those who encountered bad luck. And also I think, of course, it's hearty as well for people who think that bad luck is always something that happens to other people. In this sense, it helped me a lot that I have been living now in the States for a while, because there you can see how easily, better than in Western Europe, how easily it's to fall from the middle class into misery.
A lady up there, in the black. Pardon? Yes, yes, yes.
So back in the days, a scientist would be applauded for investigating fundamental questions. And nowadays, we don't get funding anymore unless we are solving society's biggest problems. Now, would you agree with me that meritocracy is there as much as it ever was, but there's been a change in what is meant by merit?
Yes, you're suggesting that nowadays science should be good for society. It should be solve a problem. It's not about finding out, analyzing who we are, where we are in this universe, or what. Yeah, I already said it before. That's probably there is this. I think the word neoliberalism is being overused and being used like everything is labeled neoliberalism. But this belief, if we mean by this term the belief in efficiency, and the belief that everything should get us somewhere, and without this goal, we should know exactly why we are trying to find out something and why it's being helpful. Yes, this is not a very healthy development. No, I think that, and also science should be, of course, it should be outside the. It's not like the moment a university becomes, and maybe this is also unavoidable with mass education, becomes like a factory where it takes away, in my imagination, the possibility to, like you mentioned, to look for things to research things that people think, that your professors think, that society thinks is good for nothing. But still, it might be extremely interesting. Yeah. No, I do agree that the whole thing that always it should help us, it should help us a step forward. Maybe it's the false belief in progress, that we are only making progress, and that everything what we are doing should enable us to make more progress. I think this is really an idol, the belief in progress. Yes. So I wholeheartedly agree. This was a long answer, but the short answer is yes, I wholeheartedly agree.
I think I've seen your question. I'll take an online question and then return to you, if that's okay. No? Here is someone who writes, maybe I'm wrong in my interpretation, but it seems like you, Arnon, argue for a certain acceptance and compassion for those who are not as lucky, but you do not argue for solutions, but rather against many of the solutions that you named or described. Because you note that the elite is an inevitability of meritocracy. Do you then argue for something else?
What was last part? Do you?
Or do you argue for something else?
No, I do. Well, all what I was saying, I think this is that even with all the solutions we can come up with, there will always be, when we have groups of people, there will be hierarchies.
Yes.
So the moment we really believe that we can build a classless society, I think we are going in the wrong direction, because this is such an illusion, and this goes so against everything we know about how human beings function. And this is not, I don't think I'm being cynical. And I don't think by definition that a hierarchy is something bad, or something that can only produce destructive results. But this whole taboo, I would say it's a taboo, especially here, on speaking about class, on how does it, about ruling class, about everything, how it functions, is not helpful. So I mentioned I don't have a solution. Maybe I can, maybe with my students, I mean, who knows, in 8 weeks, 9 weeks from now, we will come up with a perfect solution.
Let's hope so. Let's hope so. Yeah.
Yes, compassion is extremely important, and respect. And respect is yeah, the fact that if you don't, you're not a loser, you're not a failure if you cannot make it to university.
Yes, yes.
And I've seen it again with my godson, who did MAVO, and how he spoke, and in his surroundings was who his friends spoke about people who went to gymnasium or VWO, and how they perceived themselves as lesser gods.
Yes. Did you see Klasse?
Yeah, of course.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
If you haven't watched that documentary, it's really enlightening about what's happening in our primary education system at the moment. Yeah.
But also, for example, I've seen what's going on here with literature education on a VMBO level, on a lower level of the middle school, and I think also many children are constantly being underestimated. Mm-hmm. And this underestimation, there's this curse of the low expectation. I think this is really a tragedy.
Yes, in the Netherlands specifically, or you see it in the US?
It's just, I bet it's happening also in especially also in the US. But here in the Netherlands, I've seen it I've seen it. I've heard,
close by.
I could see it close by. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so my question is kind of related to the online question, but it's different as well. You ended your talk saying that there is no moral ground for the rewards based on merit. And I would agree with that. But then there's still a case to be made that as a meritocracy as a whole can still have moral grounds, as it allows the people with the IQ and effort that they put in the effort to get to the top and provide rewards for the rest. So that the rewards are not only looked at comparatively, but rather as the system as a whole. Would you think that there's more moral grounds for a meritocracy then?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And if it could function like this, I think it's a huge step forward. Yeah. If it could. Yeah. 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 But then you suggest that the people who, let's say, I'm a member of this lucky sperm at Egg Club, they feel the responsibility and the solidarity with the less lucky ones. In a way, yeah.
Trickle-down economics, but then it works.
What do you say?
Trickle-down economics, but then it works.
Trickle-down economics. Do you believe it? Is this something you believe in?
Well, I'm not an economist, but I'm skeptical about trickle-down economics. But if we can not focus just on the monetary part, but say that the rewards of getting relatively smart people who work hard into elite universities who then innovate on things that benefit us all, then there is some sort of trickle-down mechanism. Like even people that don't know how to program or don't know anything about silicon or math can still use iPhones.
Yeah, the word trickle-down economics is a bit problematic. You may know or not know. I think it was coined by Ronald Reagan and his advisors.
Yeah,
and I was
being ironic for that.
They used it to support tax cuts for the super rich by saying, okay, when the super rich have more money, they will spend it, and this will also help the people in the lower classes. Of course, this is like a theory that by most economists has been completely disputed. is rubbish. So yeah, but I'm not. Now I'm less convinced of what you're saying. If you're saying just because the lucky members can produce iPhones, so the lower people can have an iPhone as well because of our invention, this is not good enough for me.
Okay,
to be honest.
But then it is at least an argument that meritocracy as a form of hierarchy has some benefits, while something based purely on who your parents are might not have that benefit.
It has some benefits. I don't dispute that, and I don't also see an alternative for it at the moment. But also, I was pointing out that the failures of it are more structural than we might think, and more problematic. I see another hand.
Two hands, actually.
2 hands.
Let's start with the young man in the gray shirt.
Yeah, thanks so much. I had a question that also touches on the question that was just asked, namely that I feel that maybe the issue with meritocracy is that when we talk about the idea of meritocracy in our society, we sort of confuse the way things are and the way we like them to be. And I'm afraid that we talk about meritocracy because we like it to be that way, but we talk about meritocracy as if we've already achieved that, whereas there's a lot of inequality in terms of opportunities people get. And maybe that's the source of the problem, where we all like to think that there's a meritocracy which leads to the people that become successful in our society, that they deserve it all because everyone had an equal opportunity and they were the winner in a fair race, and because they think that they deserve to have won, they might not have the compassion for the people that didn't win.
Yeah.
Maybe we need that sort of realization that there's a lot of luck involved and that people should feel some responsibility to those who were not as lucky rather than those that didn't win because it was their own fault.
No, I think people tend, when they succeed, in what way, they always think that's because of themselves. They did it themselves. And if they fail, of course, it's always others who made them fail. So the idea that I agree, I think this was pointed out by the lady over there already, that of course we are not yet there, and maybe we will never get there, that there is really a system of equal opportunity, that everybody can join. If only, I mean, it's also a part of imagine that you were not born, I guess you were born here somewhere in the Netherlands, I assume. Imagine you were being born in Helmand, Afghanistan. I mean, one day, a man who was born in Afghanistan and now lives in the Netherlands, while we drove through Russia, he said to me, there's so many places where you would not want to be born as a human being. And I could only agree with him. So just the fact that you were that we were being born in this part of the world is already like a huge opportunity and a huge advantage. So if we speak about equality, I think it's too easy to look just at our own small world. We should look more at the whole world. And this is also why I mentioned migration. But if I agree, if you say that people tend to believe that, okay, now I succeeded and I'm making $2 million a year, 2 million is nowadays already nothing, so let's say I make 20 million, 30, 40, 50 million, I owe it because I worked so hard. Of course, this is like this is where it really gets problematic.
To what extent do you think that merit is innate or created by your surroundings, so sort of nature versus nurture? Because when you believe the one, a meritocracy would hypothetically abolish class or it would just dissolve. And in the other case, meritocracy does the exact opposite. It keeps everyone where they started.
Yeah. I think it's a combination, of course. I think, and already I said this, that environment can make up for many other disadvantages that you might have because of birth, because of a member of a because if you have an illness or sickness or you cannot do certain things. Of course, if you have the right environment. I mean, that there's also done research that if you put an orphan in a rich family, probably he will end up being more intelligent, whatever we mean by that word, and if you would put the same orphan in a very poor family without without the expectations, without the abilities of his new parents to provide the kid with all the care and ambition to make him climb the societal ladder. So I think environment plays a huge role. But I disagree with some of the leftists that environment is the only thing, and with environment, with IFI, that society can make up for all the other deficiencies. I think I have a different opinion. But yeah, was this an answer to your question or not?
Somewhat, yeah. The idea of the environment being the major role is a nicer one. So I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not also. I think the researchers are not. It's not. We are not. Oh, yeah,
we don't
no
know
one knows.
even.
It's an unfair
But
question.
it's. Yeah.
I had a sort of second question about to what extent do you think having an actual meritocracy is ever possible, because that requires us to be able to measure in some way somebody's intelligence or aptitude.
You ask. Let me repeat your question to make sure that I have understood you perfectly. You said that is it possible to have a real meritocracy, because how can we measure intelligence in a proper way?
Yeah, and how can a job interviewer actually pick the person that's best for the job? How can they actually give the person who, quote unquote, deserves it the most or has the most IQ plus work effort?
Yeah.
How can we know who that is?
It's an interesting, this in the US, and I guess also here, this discussion in America, you have this SAT system. You have the SAT test, and the results of the test will tell you if you can go to university. And some people argued that without a test it would be better, it would be helpful. But not too long ago, there was an article in the New York Times, I believe, that an expert on educational systems said that even though the SAT test is flawed, it's not a perfect test, it's still it's fairly good at predicting how a student will perform at college or university. And also what we have seen here from many various researchers, and also I think it's in classes, is that if the teacher is going to advise the child to what school to go, often based on the background of the kid, the teacher will lower or higher his advice. So if you leave it to individual teachers instead of more or less universal or a standardized test, the results will not always be better. So I agree that it's hard to measure intelligence, but if we give up on the idea that we can, maybe we are not measuring intelligence itself, but we are measuring certain abilities, and this the capacity to do certain things well. And of course, the whole school system, the educational system, not only in the Netherlands, is also about learning kids more or less what we call social intelligence, how to behave in a way that we want them to behave. We are all very much trained like pets and dogs and cats. Cats are not so much trained, but I don't have cats, to produce certain behavior which is acceptable to society. And of course, this is also part of the whole package that we call education. Have I come close to answering your question, or you're still dissatisfied?
Somewhat, yeah.
Yeah.
I would say at the metric about the New York Times article that obviously how well somebody does on the SATs is largely has to do with how well they did in high school, which is
has to do with
how well they performed in high school, since it measures the same thing.
Yeah.
So it would be a good measure of how you do in college. I would like to then know, which you probably don't know, but I would like to know how well they go on to perform in a different capacity that isn't in education, that is in a managerial role, or as in politics, or something of the other.
Can I ask you a question? What kind of, if you would run a university, how would you allow, on what grounds would you allow pupils, children, young adults to come to university? How would you select them? Or are you saying that we don't need any selection?
Well, it would be about largely their drive where their motivation comes from, what
Their drive.
yeah, what
Yeah.
their goals are, what they would want to do with being some of the, as you say, like having a chance at becoming the elite, so having power in the future, what you would want to do with that. And then obviously aptitude, but how you measure aptitude is very difficult,
Yeah.
I suppose.
And talking about drive, they should write an essay, or they should have a talk with you, and then you said, okay, you have enough drive, you can go to my university, and no, I don't know, you are not really motivated, you should go. You know.
Well, obviously that's also a difficult thing to measure.
I'm not making fun of you, it's...
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe you should go to...
All those things together makes me think that having a meritocracy is, like someone said before, sort of a hypothetical thing that we think we're close to, but we're not very.
We are not there yet.
No, I think that you can point to social mobility and to what extent is that caused by people with a lot of merit climbing up the ladder, and to what extent is that simply caused by we have wealth there, so the people that happen to have a lot of luck have the ability to do that.
Good.
It's difficult to know which it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I see 2 questions up here. There's another question up there, but I'll take one online. And I know you were first, madam, but to save the legs of my dear colleague, I will take an online question, come to this gentleman there with the great Nintendo shirt, and then come to you. From the online questions, Arnon, we have, why not pour the resources to make minorities be better at the meritocracy game instead of rigging the whole game? So why not pour the resources to make the minorities be better?
Yes, that's why not. I have nothing against. I mean, this is if this person is saying we should put more money in we should give schools in certain neighborhoods more money. I think this is already being done in certain places. Yes, but then of course, again, what I said before, we can not always giving more money is just one thing. It is not only, it's the first step, and it might produce the result we want, but it might also just, as we have seen so often in many places, and also in the Netherlands, it might just be a very nice game for corruption and for people enriching themselves with government money without helping the people who it was once assigned for.
Yeah. That's always a risk.
So, but of course, I would have nothing against it. But then again, this is all, we are living in a democracy. If you can convince the voters to do this, why not?
Yeah, I think they're not completely convinced at this moment. Mil.
All right, first I will start with kind of my personal belief, and it's about luck, what actually luck is. It's 70% hard work and 30% chance. Because, for example, if you haven't ever driven a car and you go to a driving test, you're not going to take it because you can't start your car, let's say. And then I would go to the educational system. I'm immigrant. I'm from Eastern Europe, ex-communist country. I'm from Bulgaria. And a lot of people come from there here to study in university. And it's great. However, when I hear stories from friends of mine who are Dutch and have been studying here in the primary school and after that in high school, I even feel furious. Why? Because going through this lecture about hierarchy and so on, I end up at the impression that the country itself creates some kind of a hierarchy at the age of 12. As far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong, but here a teacher has the decision which child in which education will proceed. How somebody can decide where do you go? A person can't be fully impartial. So something that actually I believe I can tell from experience of mine, that's a good point of these ex-communist countries is that everything depends on yourself. When I was a kid, I was good at math. Then I had an examination at 14 years old on 2 subjects, math and language, the national language. Then based on these results, I can decide where to go, which school suits me best. There is always like a ranking. It's not a ranking, official one, but you choose where to go based on stories and so on, and what you're choosing is actually the surroundings, the people around you, where you're gonna end up with the best students. But again, it depended on me. I decide how I go, I worked hard, my results show where should I go, and so on. And I chose to go in a language school. From being good in math, I went into a language school where I didn't study almost any math. And after that, again, it was about me who chose to go to technical university.
Do you have a question also to Arnon?
No, yeah, it's more about, do you think this is something indeed like, how to say it, unfair, somebody to decide. I tried to give an example of another system and refer it to the one here in lower education.
Thank you for your question and for your, what you were saying. Let me go back first for 1 second to what you said about hard work. I think this is maybe true, but also the question whether you are capable of performing this hard work is also related to your environment and to, again, to your, whatever we call it, genetics or sperm club or whatever. So it's not only the fact that you were capable of working hard is not by definition your own achievement in general, I would say. And I think this is also confirmed by most research. To the second part of your question, yes, we select in the Netherlands quite early. And as far, based on what I've read, many educational sociologists and many experts are advising to make the selection later. Not at 12, at the age of 12, but at 15 or 16, and let children study together with all different levels together in one group, and this will produce a better outcome, a more equal outcome, or will give also the children who might have a disadvantage, who might be behind in certain aspects of the education, might give them the chance to get better and to perform much better. So of course I don't know much, I don't know anything, to be honest, about the school system in Bulgaria. But if you believe that the Bulgarian system is better than the Dutch system, I hope that you will run for office in the Netherlands and are going to implement the Bulgarian system in this country. This is only partly, I'm saying this partly in jest, but I'm also seriously, because if this is, I think this is one of the advantages of migration, is that you can make things better. I'm not sure if this is the place where you would like to live, or if you want to go back to Bulgaria. You want to go back to Bulgaria, or you want to stay here? Or you want to go to...
For me, I want to be a citizen of the globe. I want to be, as well as here, I call here home, I call Bulgaria home as well. Okay, that's a whole other subject. The citizen of the world subject, we can discuss for a long time, because then you still need a community where, but okay. Well, if you have advice, if you think that the system in your country, in Bulgaria, is much better, then maybe we should learn from you. You look skeptical, as if you don't want us to learn from... No. Okay, so what I try to say is that our university system might be years behind yours. But what I think our is better is the fact that everyone can go to university. Even if you're from the poorest school ever, you can go to university, because people change. I changed at the age of 14. Somebody can change at the age of 18. And at the point you change, you can decide to do something with yourself. Yeah. And the system here tells you, yeah, you can't go to university, or as far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong, because you didn't perform well at the age of 12.
Well, you need to have a certain education in order to go to university. But I assume that also the universities in Bulgaria will have will select people.
Yes, they do.
And how do they select?
By an entrance exam.
Okay.
You need to perform well on the entrance exam, but you go to an exam. It's not based on 5 years, like a decision 5 years ago.
Okay.
If I study hard for 2 years, for example, I do the exam, I go to university.
Interesting. Yeah.
I think we have quite a few questions here, so I'd like to move on, if that's okay. And there's a lady here at the front with a beautiful golden brooch.
You answered my question already in the meantime for a part, but I'm going to ask you anyway. We are going to have a new government, as you know, and presume by some miracle you are going to be the Minister of Education in the Netherlands. What would you change in the educational system?
Whew. That's the toughest question of the evening. Well,
you've
I'm
managed
very
to
much
silence
aware of
him.
the fact that, as I said before, that even you can have a brilliant mind and think this is how it should be. I know how it should work, and then you're still dependent. Even if you're a minister, or even if you're prime minister, your power is very limited. I'm afraid. So. Your brilliant ideas might turn out to be rubbish when they are implemented. I think that the suggestion of this young man coming from Bulgaria is by having an exam, by opening up universities in a different way, that we're not saying you need to have VWO in order to go to university, might be an interesting idea. The question with education is, whatever system, if you have a brilliant and inspiring teacher, you will that's the main thing. So the main thing of education is not the idea of a minister. It's the human resources. It's an ugly word, but that's the teacher standing there and giving something. And this is the same, I would say, for universities or for elementary schools, for middle schools. What I remember from, and I never finished my high school, as you might know, what I remember from being there in elementary school and in high school is that whenever I worked hard, I did it because I loved my teacher. And not because I loved the subject, because I loved this person, and he gave me something that I wanted to be seen by this man or by this woman. I wanted to excel for him. So I think that's educating children or even adults is something very intimate and very personal. Yeah. And that's the secret. Okay. And I think we believe too much in this, and not only that, it's a cultural problem. It's also in healthcare, it's everywhere that we have this rules, we have this ways of how we think. We are so afraid of risks that we took away many liberties of the individual teachers and healthcare providers, and I think this has not always been helpful, and is not always giving us better results.
So more autonomy for the teachers, or for the professionals in general? Yeah,
I remember when I was in elementary school, we ended up with one CITO-toets at the end, and now. Again, if I'm looking at what I've seen with they started with examining him when he was 5, 6, 7, and they were telling, oh, you are 2 months behind in reading, you are 6 months behind in math, but you are 1 month ahead in gymnastics. I mean, this is like how can we expect a 6, 7-year-old child to have the ambition to read a book when all he's hearing from his teacher, you're 3 months behind compared to the others. This is the madness. I would say it's a madness, this kind of the fear that we have, that all should be, that we don't trust the teacher, the person who's standing there, to do his or her best, and that we want to see the results, and we can say, oh, there is the problem, so there we should provide this money to this school, because there's so many children who are 8 months behind this, and that's... Yeah.
I think a very welcome message also to the teachers within our own community. I see more questions online, but we're out of time, so I would like to ask you to come down and maybe ask the question.
Maybe
after
one last
the
question?
Pardon? Yes, You're the boss, Arnon.
Oh, no.
Or at least the next 2 minutes.
The next 2 minutes. One last question. Is there one person who's really like, who has to believe that this...
I think this young up there?
Yeah?
Or?
Oh, is the question or a monologue? Okay, if you do it in 60 seconds, can you do it in yeah?
So I did the teacher's course, master's course at the TU, and I went to a secondary school, and I was baffled by the amount of rules you have. Like, you have to explain a topic in a certain context. You have to do that, because else it's wrong. And then I went to, it was a VWO. And then I also taught at an MBO, it's like a side job. And there the teachers come together, they're like, well, we're going to teach our kids this year. And then they ask to some companies, they're like, what do you want these kids to learn? And they say this and this and this, and help the teachers do it. And next year they do it again. And it was like breathtaking for me. It was like, what's going on? It's like really weird. The amount of freedom was, for me, felt like it should be opposite, like in the standard way that you perceive things. Like VWO is this free subject, but it was entirely closed off by rules, as you just said.
Well, thank you for making my argument even a bit better.
Okay. Well, with that remark, I would like to thank you again, Arnon. We will see you again.
Yes.
Because when you're going on journey with the students, who are, a lot of them are here as well, and we look forward to hearing your endeavors. Yeah.
Thank you.
And thank you for viewers at home, and for the Bachelor College watching, Bachelor College students watching at home. You can register for the youth program, and there's a link in the chat in a bit. So, good evening, everyone. Thank you again.